Peasants. Peasants made up the lowest and largest class of people in Egypt's social pyramid. Over 80% of people in ancient Egypt were peasants. They were generally considered to be unskilled workers. However, Egyptian society depended on their work. Peasants were mostly farmers who grew the crops that supplied everyone with food. When not busy working the fields, peasants helped build monuments like the pyramids. Peasant life revolved around the Nile River. The three seasons of the Nile River were the flooding season, the planting season, and the harvest season. Let's start with the flooding season. The flooding season lasted from June to September. During this time, the Nile flooded and fertilized the fields. Farmers had to wait for the waters to go down before they could work on the fields. In the meantime, while they waited for the floods to calm, they worked on royal projects such as building pyramids and temples. In October, the planting season began, and farmers filled their fields with seeds. The biggest crops were wheat and barley, which were used to make bread. Peasants worked in pairs to prepare the fields. The farmers softened the earth with a plow pulled by a cattle. The second person, often the farmer's wife, followed behind to scatter the seeds. Throughout the season, farmers carefully irrigated the land. The harvest season began in March. This was the toughest season for the peasants. Usually, the farmer's entire family helped with the harvest. The men cut down the plants with sickles, which were metal blades with short wooden handles. Then the women and children gathered the tall stalks of grain. During harvest time, everyone worked from dawn to dusk. Peasants often sang songs to make the long hours of labor go more quickly. Sometimes musicians played in the fields while the workers sang. Peasants had the fewest comforts of any of the social classes. They lived in plain houses made of mud bricks. They barely even had furniture, mostly just woven mats. The peasants' diet was also very simple. A typical daily meal might be made up of onions, cucumbers, fish, and homemade bread. Peas and lentils were also common. Unlike the upper classes, peasants rarely were able to eat meat. During times where there was not enough food being produced, they often had to boil tough papyrus plants for food. So they were eating plants. Peasants spent most of their lives working, but they did have some time for fun. Men enjoyed a river game that involved knocking each other off of papyrus rafts. Holidays were celebrated before planting and after the crops were harvested. Peasants also took part in festivals held to honor the Egyptian gods. An important time of year for peasants was the end of harvest season. As a reward for their hard work, they were allowed to gather up any of the leftover grain and keep it for their food. However, the peasants could also be punished for a poor harvest. Farmers had to pay taxes in the form of crops. If a harvest came up too short to pay the required tax, a farmer might be brutally beaten.